You're listening to the Comic Crusaders podcast. I am your host, Al Mega, CEO of Comic Crusaders and Undercover Capes. In this show, I'm sitting down with creators from all walks of life to talk about inspiration, process, the lessons they've learned, and a whole lot more.
Well, power man, this is your boy Al Mega. Welcome to a brand new Comic Crusaders podcast. And today, is episode 400. You believe it? Number 400. And you know how we're gonna celebrate? By helping you save some money as geeks. You know, we love collecting. You know, sometimes that expense gets a little crazy, and especially if we have a spouse, you know, where we're opening boxes, hiding them, and saying, "Oh, that's been on our shelf." No more excuses, because we have the king right here. He is the producer and host of the NerdWallet Smart Money podcast. He is a debt writer. He is a fellow nerd out on a mission. One, the only Mr. Sean Pyles.
What's up, Thanks for having me, Al.
Thank you for coming on, kid. I appreciate you taking some time out of your busy days, saving people money, just to talk about us and how we could, you know, hopefully do the same, you know, by listening to your podcast, seeing your mission. You know, let's get to know who Sean is, you know, in the usual Comic Crusader fashion. All right, my brother Sean, let us know where you OG from. And I need to know, since you say it's all about NerdWallet, I'm pretty sure you're a nerd. I also need to know, what's the origin of your fandom? What's the first thing you fell in love with?
That's a great question. So I grew up around the Chicago area and then went out to college in New England, hopped around the West Coast a bit, and now I'm in Washington State. And so I'm based kind of all over the place, but the Pacific Northwest is home now. And the first fandom that got me, it would have to be Pokemon, going back to Gen 1, collecting Pokemon cards, trading them on the playground, playing the video games. I still play them sometimes, although they're just so, but it's kind of nostalgic and fun in that way.
Well, excellent. Were you solo on your geekdom, you know, when you were young, or did you have a tribe of geeks with you?
I had a good amount of friends that were geeks. I also have a twin sister. So she and I would trade Pokemon cards, and we would each get different versions of the Pokemon games, so we would trade between each other. So I had her helping me out with my nerddom from a young age.
So as siblings, can I assume it was peaceful trading?
For the most part, yeah. We liked different types of Pokemon, so we tried to be on the same team. Occasionally, we would fight over a holographic card, but by and large, we were pretty much on the same page.
That's awesome. All right, so talk to me about this journey of yours here, the story behind the inception of what is NerdWallet Smart Money. What led you onto this lane, if you will?
Yeah, well, my background is in journalism. I got my start writing for small local publications in places like Chicago and Vermont and the Bay Area. NerdWallet brought me on just about 8 years ago, and I was interested in doing a podcast because I had previous podcasting experience. And since I had pretty fresh eyes in the personal finance world, I thought, hey, why don't I share my journey about learning about personal finance and help listeners do the same thing? Because as I'm sure you know, people learn in different ways. Some people want to read an article, others want to listen to a podcast, some want to watch a live stream. It's all about how you are as a learner. So I thought, let's adapt how we are presenting information online and make a podcast. And so many years and many millions of downloads later, here we are.
Wepa. So so you said it was like 8 years ago. Was it 8 years ago that even when you came in, you started talking about podcasts? Because even 8 years ago, you know, not everybody wanted to do this, especially businesses. So how did you even convince NerdWallet to want to do a podcast?
It was gradual. I'm almost at my 8-year anniversary of NerdWallet, and I first had the idea probably about 6 months in. And then we launched our first episode summer 2017. It was just a trial. We weren't totally ready to go ahead with it. But then actually going back to January 2020, we started publishing episodes weekly. And that, as you can imagine, was a really interesting time to be talking about personal finance on a weekly basis, because just a couple months in, everything changed and we had to adapt how we were talking about money, what was going on with the pandemic. And that was a great lesson for us for how we can help people when crisis hits.
Excellent. So as the host, then, what do you find to be the most rewarding about helping nerds with their personal finance and questions, you know, via the Smart Money podcast?
Yeah, well, the structure of Smart Money, most of our episodes, we answer listeners' questions, whatever they may be, whether it's how to manage your finances when you're self-employed, or we get questions about, hey, I have this credit card debt, how do I pay it off? And sometimes we talk with listeners on the podcast about that. And after these conversations, I'll often hear from them a month, 6 months later, and they'll say, hey, my finances were in this place when we spoke, and now I've been able to do all these different things based on the conversation that we had. And while on the show, I don't tell people what to do with their money, my job is just to give people information and tools so they can make their own decisions. Realizing that they are able to better their lives based on the conversations that we have is really rewarding. And that's what keeps me working day in, day out, even when it's busy and stressful. Just genuinely connecting with people, helping them better their finances is what it's all about.
I love that. So what inspired you to delve into the topic of debt in your writing, and what key insights have you gained along the way that you could share with us?
Well, I wouldn't say there was a single inspiration that got me into debt. It was more like I was assigned to the debt vertical when I was brought into NerdWallet, and I didn't know a lot about it except for the fact that I had debt of my own. I had student loans. I'd had a little bit of credit card debt in the past. I had some tax debt, and I was like, well, I guess I can speak from experience that having debt isn't fun. But one of my main takeaways as I've gotten into this is that no matter what kind of debt you have, it isn't a moral failure to have debt. For many, debt is unavoidable. It's a necessity. It's also a tool. So it is morally neutral depending on how you want to use it. It's a matter of leveraging it in the right way, not letting it get out of proportion and control for your finances, and finding a way to make it as cost efficient for you as possible.
All right. I want to talk about it because I saw that kind of mentioned in your website, nerdwallet.com, right there, folks. And about there's good debt and there's bad debt. Can you differentiate? I mean, what is that exactly?
Yeah, so I said that debt is kind of neutral, but there are different types of debt, right? So a good debt is a debt that helps you advance in your life. And in general, a good debt is a debt where the economic life of it extends beyond the payment term of it, if that makes sense. So a mortgage is a great example of what we would consider a good debt, because the term is 30 years. It'll likely last longer than 30 years. What's often considered a bad debt is maybe an expensive used car where the loan is maybe 5 years and it's only really going to get you 3 years when you're driving it around. So that could be considered a bad debt. Another one that is often considered a bad, or sometimes even a toxic debt, is something like a payday loan, where the interest rates can be exorbitant and they can be very hard to get out from under, and you're not getting that much payoff for it in terms of economic advancement.
How can we avoid getting into those bad debt circumstances?
Well, sometimes it comes down to knowing what your options are. If you find that cash is really tight and an emergency pops up, sometimes leaning on that credit card is inevitable. And so it's a matter of getting out of that as soon as you can, or finding alternatives. So if you need to make a payment on a bill and you just don't have that cash with you, is there a friend or a family member that could help you out in that pinch? Just trying to make it so that the debt that you do take on is affordable for you, exploring all of your options, and then finding a way to pay it off once you are in debt.
All right. Well, your experience in the podcast and the time you've had on it, can you maybe highlight a memorable or impactful moment from the podcast where your advice had actually made a significant impact on a listener?
I just got an email yesterday from a listener that I talked with. Yeah. And he's a young guy. He's 22, I think, and he was debating what to do with some money that he had saved up. His car was in really rough shape, and he had a history of buying really crappy cars off the side of the road and then driving them into the ground. And so he was thinking, hey, I have this pot of money. My car is on its last legs. Do I put this money toward a car, or do I put it toward the school that I'm about to start? And we talked with him about how it doesn't have to be an either or. Sometimes you can split the difference and say, hey, I'm going to put this amount of money that I have saved up toward my car to get a lower monthly payment by putting some toward the down payment, and then another chunk of the money toward schools, so they have fewer student loans. So it's really about trying to make the most of your situation based on the cash that you have at hand and what you want to accomplish. And he was able to do all of that. He said, hey, I split the difference and I'm feeling really satisfied about how I made this decision. Even though I did take on debt, something he didn't exactly feel great about doing, he's confident that he made the best decision for him. So by talking it through with us, he was able to explore all of his different options and then make that really educated decision.
Gotcha. So All right. So, in your experience, then, what are some of the most common financial challenges that nerds, in particular, face, and how do you even address them on the podcast when they come in with these questions?
Yeah. Well, in personal finance, it's a lot about trying to accomplish your life goals and knowing what tools can get you there while balancing your other priorities. And that's often the crux of a lot of questions that we have is people say, "Hey, I really want to save for my kids' college, but I have this mortgage that's eating up most of my cash. What can I do?" And so it's a matter of helping people find the middle ground between all that they want to do and making progress on multiple goals simultaneously. So there isn't a specific question that we get more frequently than another, I would say. It's more about how people are balancing these life priorities and using money as a tool to accomplish them.
Well, money is a tool at the end of the day, for sure. Um, so as a debt writer, what are your top tips then for nerds looking to manage and overcome their debt effectively, if you will?
First of all, know what you have because sometimes when you rack up debt, particularly credit card debt, if it's across a few different types of accounts, it can be hard to know exactly what your balance is. So, one really easy way to do that is to make a spreadsheet, write this out on a pen and paper if you are really old school like that, and list all of your accounts, list your balance, list your interest rate, list your due date for it, your minimum payment. And then look at your budget and see how much money you have monthly to allocate toward these different types of debt. So that's kind of step one, is just knowing what you're working with.
I already
Once you're
did
at, yeah, it's like
that.
you can't make progress on a goal if you don't know where you are now. You need to understand what square one is so you can get to square 100, which is hopefully being debt free. So then once you really get a lay of the land, it's about figuring out how you want to pay it off. And there are a lot of different ways to pay off your debt. If you have credit card debt, one route that people like to talk about is the debt snowball method. And that's where you attack your smallest debt first while making minimum payments on your other accounts. So say you have a credit card that has $200 on it or something like that. You will want to pay that off as soon as you can. And then you take the amount that you're paying toward that debt and then put it toward the next biggest debt. And then you focus on that for a while. Once that's paid off, you take that amount from now these two debts, put it into your third debt, and you can see how you begin to gain momentum. And that's a really great way. Oh yeah, go on.
That's for Manners Network. Want to say hello, but
Oh hey,
do you think that's an effective method? Because what if the higher interest card has a lower the higher rate card has a lower interest rate? You know what I mean? Or rather,
yes.
the lower rate card has a lower interest rate versus the higher one. I mean,
Yes, and what you're describing is the inverse of the debt snowball. It's called the debt avalanche, where you target
yeah.
your debts to the highest interest rate first. And sometimes you're right, that can be mathematically more efficient and it could save you some money in the long run. However, I tend to be an advocate of the debt snowball method because of the psychological boost that you get when you pay off an account.
Right.
Knowing that you have one fewer account to have to pay off and keep track of every month, and that you actually paid it off entirely can be huge because paying off debt is a slog. It's often not very fun. You want to get wins where you can take them, and that's what the debt snowball method offers.
You see, and this is how we get and keep hair like Sean has. You know what I mean? Possibly use that method, less stress in our lives. I am digging this. All right. So, how do you approach staying updated then on the latest personal finance trends and incorporating them into your content for the Smart Money podcast? Such as do you believe in crypto investing and all that? Do you think that's a good thing, bad thing? I mean, all these new things coming out there, NFTs, all that. Not that they're new, but rather, much more popular than ever. What do you think?
Yeah, well, I would say for anyone that wants to stay up to date on personal finance news, listen to NerdWallet Smart Money Podcast. Every Wednesday, we have a news episode, so I got to plug that right here and now.
What time does that drop?
It drops, I think it's 12:01 a.m. Pacific time on Wednesdays. So
Beautiful.
wherever you are on Wednesday, you can go to your podcast feed, check out NerdWallet Smart Money Podcast. We have a newsy episode, and we cover things like what does the unemployment rate mean for you? This week, we talked about the new free application for federal student aid, the FAFSA, and what that means for people because there are a lot of changes there. So we cover the full gamut of personal finance news. So really, for me, it's about understanding what your resources are to get personal finance information. I listen to a lot of radio shows. I read a lot of articles from finance websites. NerdWallet also has a ton of news content that we publish on the website. So I turn to my fellow colleagues
You
and I
mean this
see
website?
that website right there. Yes. So we have a whole section where we just cover regular news in the personal finance space. So if you want to know what's going on in the world of finance, NerdWallet's a great resource for that, whether it's you're shopping for a credit card or you're just wondering what's going on today in the world of money.
I'm digging the energy because, again, as collectors, we love to invest in our goodies and do what we do. So, we got to learn how to save some money. All right. So I got to ask you, Sean, what role does any listener feedback and questions play into shaping the content and direction of the podcast?
It's very influential because the listeners that we have are the reason for the show. We want to make content that is as useful for them as possible. So when we hear feedback from people that they want us to cover a certain topic or another, that is really impactful. We hear that and we think, okay, how can we address this listener's need? And we genuinely make an effort to cover that, especially if it is in line with the topics that NerdWallet typically covers.
Gotcha. So let me ask you, brother, in your opinion, what are some of the key financial principles that every nerd should be aware of for long-term financial success?
Number one is really knowing what you want out of life, because money is just a means to an end. So think really hard about that. Have conversations with your friends, your family, your partner, if you have one, and envision what are you going to be doing in your life 5 years from now, 10 years from now, maybe even just 5 weeks from now. And how can you leverage money to help you get there? Because that's what it's really about at the end of the day. It's not about stacking up these digits in your wallet that can feel really intangible sometimes. It's about making the life that you want. So that's number one. It's just knowing what you want your future to be and then how you can use money to get there.
See, you hear that, folks? I mean, ain't that some truth? So, let's get into this podcast making thing. Because again, being 8 years, in doing it for what you've been doing it, can you share some of the behind the scenes insights into, the collaboration process with other nerds across the NerdWallet content team and family, and just in your journey?
Yeah, man, it's an interesting day to ask me that question because my longtime co-host, Liz Weston, who's a certified financial planner professional, she is retiring today. And so I have been able to lean on many talented people, including Liz and a number of other great colleagues, to help inspire me to bring a consumer first focus, really strong ethical standards, a dedication to truth, and also patience and kindness to everything that I've done. And so working with people who are so smart, are so kind, are so dedicated to helping people has been a key to making the show the success that it is. And on top of all of those qualities, people just work super hard at NerdWallet. So we wouldn't be able to churn out all the episodes that we do if I didn't have so many colleagues that are collaborating behind the scenes to make it what it is. Because yeah, sure, I'm the main host and producer of the show, but there are many, many other people behind the scenes working to fact check things, get the show notes out the door, help us with script documents, coordinate the guests that we have. Because part of why the show works so well is that we have a huge content team of expert nerds who cover everything from insurance, student loans, news, credit cards, all of that. And we have them come on and they answer our listeners' questions with me. So on episodes, I'm really the listener's advocate asking questions around, hey, so our listener wants to travel more this year and use credit cards to make that happen. How can they actually do that if they haven't done much with travel credit cards previously? And then the nerd that we have talk with us gives us their insights. So really from the top to the bottom of the entire company, including the legal department, the comms department, marketing, everyone's collaborating in some way to make smart money possible.
I mean, amazing. I'm digging this energy. It's powerful. It's positive. Where do you dig in to get this positive energy, Sean? I mean, what inspires you to want to even help and be this light to get people in a better situation?
I think it might sound kind of odd. It's a realization that life can be hard, but we can help each other make it easier. So money is a very stressful thing for a lot of people. It can be a source of loneliness. People can feel like they aren't good enough with money because they didn't have this kind of education, because really not many people were educated about money growing up, myself included. And I see what we're doing here as a way to better the world in that sense. We're creating information that is allowing people to change their lives for the better. And that inspires me every day. I know it sounds corny, but it is true.
No, I'm not, but I'm digging it, man. So, you do the podcast and all. Do you do any speaking events or engagement where people can maybe meet you in person? Have you read any books? I mean, what's popping? Let's talk. Let's start selling here. What's going on?
I haven't done a ton of speaking engagements. We did a live podcast episode a couple of years back when we had an all company get together, and that was super fun. So I would love to do more things like that because, like I mentioned before, connecting with listeners is really one of my favorite parts of the job. So the more I can do that, the better. And then, of course, back when I was when I went to Comic-Con, New York Comic-Con back in the fall, that was a great place to meet people on the floor and talk
Yeah,
with
I
them
saw
about how they manage their money. So that was a great time.
what type of insights did you get from that, coming from the comic geek cosplay perspective? Because you dope cosplay that you were like stepping up to. Also, I mean, for me, my favorite was the Galactus, especially when he spread his hand and he had a little.
Oh yeah. Well, I was super impressed by how thrifty people were. A lot of folks that I talked with were making their costumes from things that they had around the house or the dollar store or thinking about being collaborative again. A lot of people had friends who were able to lend them some foam or some paint, or they were making costumes for people that they were going to see later on. So it was all a big communal moment of people trying to help each other out to make the best costume they could. And it was so cool to see.
Did you have a favorite costume?
I think my favorite was the Ryuk from Death Note. He had these glowing red eyes and paper mache face.
I think I saw it. Yeah. I'm pretty sure I saw that one. There was a lot.
Kind of scary, but it was great. And that guy, I think he had a different costume every single day, so he really went all out. And another one that comes to mind is there was this husband and wife couple, and they were two characters from Mario Kart. I think they may have both been the blue shells. Like in Mario Kart, it goes after the player in first place. And they made a lot of their costumes from folders and tape that they got at the dollar store. And you would never know because it looked so professional. So they were super creative and really thrifty, and I just loved that.
So there you go. That's what NerdWallet wants to see, right? People being
yeah,
their money and smart. Yeah, because I actually saw great advice. Thank you for doing that. And was that your first Comic-Con?
It was my first Comic-Con. Yeah, I'd never been to one. So that was part of the fun too, is going in with totally fresh eyes. I kind of knew what to expect. I'd seen photos from a Comic-Con previously, but I didn't know just how open and forthcoming people were, because people spend so much time, sometimes all year, making these costumes, and they want to talk about it. And so they were really open to all of my questions. I was worried that I might be too prying, but they were happy to talk about the finances behind their costume and also just their finances in life in general. Maybe the masks that they had on made it a little bit easier to talk about some private details like this because no one could see their faces, but people were just so generous, and I was really impressed by that.
Excellent. But I love it. You are a geek and a fan. So any upcoming things that maybe are coming up on the podcast, any specials, or are you going to do anything where we could see you in person? What's going on?
I don't have any in-person events lined up yet, but I'm hoping that we can get one on the books for later this year at some point. On the podcast, one thing that we're doing is next month we'll have a series about self-employed finances. So if you are self-employed, it's all about how to manage things like your benefits, your budget, taxes, the ins and outs, all of that, which can be kind of complicated. Right now, we're actually running a series about how to manage your money in 2024 across the board, everything like travel points, buying a house this year, your credit report, investing. So I would recommend everyone check that out if they want to learn how to just make the most of their money as we start this year. And then looking a little further down the line, I'll be doing a series in a couple months about scams of all sorts, including AI scams. I'm not sure if you've heard about these voice scams that are out there where someone can take 3 seconds of your voice and make a perfect duplicate of it through AI. Those are becoming more and more common, and it's all very terrifying. So we'll be digging into all sorts of topics to help consumers navigate the question of what do I do with my money?
You'd laugh because anytime I get a weird call, I purposely answer and I just put a funny voice or I have a movie on and let them take. For right now, they probably think that I sound like the Robert De Niro or somebody. You know what I mean? Yeah, that's my voice.
That's a great tactic.
Yeah, like I'm not saying nothing. If I don't know that number, I ain't saying anything. You ain't hearing my voice. Let me tell you. Yeah. I appreciate your time today, brother. Again, tell them again, when does the Smart Money Podcast drop again?
3 times a week. We release episodes on Monday, on Wednesday, and on Thursday. And you can get us wherever you find your podcasts.
Wepa, there we go, folks. If you want to learn how to navigate the game, save some of that money, for, again, a better life. Because, again, as he said, money is just a tool. And the tool should be working for us, not us for it. You feel me? So let's make it happen. Sean, you rock. Mi gente, my Crusaders. Love you guys. Happy 2024. Right. Let's make it a great one. Tune into NerdWallet. You know what it is. Hasta la próxima. Wait.
All right. Thanks, Al.
Thank you for listening to the Comic Crusaders podcast. If you like the content, please subscribe and turn on notifications. Also, please visit ComicCrusaders.com and our extended podcast family over at UndercoverCapes.com. And also, make sure to download the Comic Crusaders app on the Google Play Store today.